Next up, we have Dinesh. I'm going to leave that alone. Security Engineering Manager at Google, who is going to talk to us about securing the SaaS supply chain and a practical approach. Hopefully the clicker is there. Yes, okay. Right. Dinesh, go ahead.
Hello. Hello. Good afternoon to everybody in the room and the folks that have joined us on live streaming. This is my first time presenting at FOSSASIA. I'm very excited to be here. Before we begin, I want to share some context, so some of this will start making sense. Building commercial products using less proprietary code began to gain popularity in the early 2010. So prior to this time, from a security perspective, protecting code and products I built was relatively easy because I control all aspects of the development process. And with open source, the security industry had to pivot. Hosting the products in first-party data centers have been the gold standard for many years, until the advent of cloud. Prior to this time, from a security perspective, protecting the underlying infrastructure was relatively easy because I control all aspects of the deployment process. With cloud, the security industry again had to pivot. For a few years now, the mass adoption of software as a solution for core business operations is picking up more rapidly than ever before, and that demands the security industry to pivot again. So let's talk about SaaS security. Quick introduction. My name is Dinesh. I lead a team called 3P SaaS Security at Google. I've been with Google for about 5 years. I've been doing security for over 15 years. Prior to Google, I was at Microsoft and a company called Box in very similar roles. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep moving forward. Okay, what's on the menu? I'm going to discuss why we are in this situation today, describe the problem statement. I'm going to share some lessons from my program journey at Google and Microsoft, my picks for top security risks, SaaS security risks, discuss some of the controls that have worked for me, what are some of the current challenges, how can we do this at scale, and some key takeaways. Okay, so before I start, please note that all the views, opinions shared in this presentation are solely my own. Please do not attribute this to Google or any of my previous employers. And the second blurb, all it says is some of the ideas I share in this presentation is not a magic drug that will fix everything. At the least, they'll help you take some steps in the right direction. So organizations are under immense pressure to deliver results. They're becoming increasingly reliant on a wide variety of vendors, partners, suppliers to reduce the time to market. However, these third parties have access to some really critical, sensitive data sets and creating a very big attack surface. Any weak security practices among these partners may allow attackers to compromise them even if the organization's own security, own systems are secure. The increased reliance creates a domino effect because one vendor compromise may affect all their customers, and there are numerous examples from history that will tell you the same. SolarWinds, Log4j are classic examples. Implementing supply chain security program is very challenging because of a variety of reasons. Budget, resource constraints, there is no standardization, best practices that are available, talent shortage. Lastly, there is unclear ownership between the SaaS provider and the consumer. So today, I want to share some best practices and things that worked for me. So I'm going to try and address number 2 a little bit. So a quick word on the supply chain universe. Third-party vendors may provide code, open source, SaaS, which is what we're going to be talking about today, which is software, infrastructure, commercial cloud, GCP, AWS, Azure, you name it, hardware, contract manufacturing, human resources, these all fall under the supply chain. Today, we're going to be talking about the SaaS program. The business data that used to live within our own walls, under our own direct control, is now with somebody else that we know very less about. These 3P systems have integrations into 1P systems, making lateral movement possible. So from an attacker's perspective, a small SaaS provider becomes a far more attractive target to compromise larger companies than to target the larger companies directly. Am I making this up? Is this real? Yes. Here is some data to show that security breaches related to 3P systems are becoming very, very common. Unfortunately, they're on the rise too. Between 2023 and 2024, the industry has seen an uptick in the number of events. At the top there, you see it's quite shocking to see some big names there. And given that they're major players, hundreds of their customers would have been impacted. That makes supply chain risks more dangerous. So some of the prediction gurus, this is not coming from me, some of the prediction gurus say that the numbers are going to continue to increase as more companies adopt SaaS. I'm not going to go through each of these numbers, but the fact is the adoption of SaaS is going to increase over time. Okay. So what makes this tricky is in a mature enterprise, what makes this problem hard to solve? First thing is agreeing on what is SaaS. The obvious definition, if you ask around, is software that's hosted off-premise. Then is Pastebin a SaaS solution? Or does the application have to access, store PII or business confidential data? Do employees need to log in for you to call it a SaaS? So the definition of SaaS is important to define the problem scope. The second one is, how do we know where to start, how to prioritize, and when to stop? Understandably, inventory is a huge problem. What is the authoritative source of all SaaS applications that are being used by your employees? The next one is governance. There are multiple avenues for software purchases. You go through the proper PO channel, you pull out your personal credit card or your corporate credit card to buy software on the site, acquisition. So there are no single point of entry here, and that creates SaaS. The last one is about scale. There are hundreds, thousands of these SaaS apps, instances, environments, you name it. So gauging risk in a repeatable fashion is not straightforward. So how do we start? First one is start building an inventory. Reach out to the procurement team, start looking at device logs, network logs, to be able to come up with some initial list. And then use whatever risk framework you're comfortable with to start classifying them, high, low, medium, whatever works. I've seen companies using type and volume of data to start, but that's okay. Next one is focus on controls that you can manage. For example, asking a vendor if they encrypt data at rest, which cannot be technically verifiable, versus do you support strict single sign-on capabilities is generally preferred. Otherwise, this whole thing will become a long questionnaire that nobody cares about. Now that the requirements are defined, start assessing your most critical applications against them and find some common problems. This is for you to show some quick wins, golden nuggets, before you start receiving blessings, support, funding from your leadership team, so that you can start developing controls that have the biggest bang for the buck. Try to apply these controls by default wherever possible. By the way, this is a point-in-time assessment, which will quickly become stale, obsolete, if we don't implement the right continuous monitoring controls. I'll talk about them in the next couple slides. Last but not least, build partnerships with the right teams, legal, procurement, privacy. Seek feedback from these stakeholders. Use incident data to adjust your priorities accordingly as you continue to evolve the program. In the interest of time, I'm going to double-click on the couple of areas really quickly. Start with defining your security requirements like I mentioned before. For the most part, this will be in line with your organization's security and privacy policies and procedures. In my experience, again, having controls that you can technically verify to some extent are far better than the ones you cannot. Control categories may include the standard security pillars like identity and access management, session management, detection response, integrations, software development lifecycle if you contribute code that runs on the SaaS environment, bulk data transfers. And then start defining maturity levels per control. So as you define each of these controls, have maturity levels. For example, in my past experience, we have set multiple maturity levels for these controls. Call it minimum, basic, intermediate. Give you an example. Say a SaaS provider has a capability where every new user account or any account you create within that SaaS environment by default only has minimal set of permissions when you create them. If a SaaS provider meets that control, I would call it minimum. Assume that the level of granularity of those controls allows you to change that so they're only able to do the things that are required to do. I would call that level of control as basic. If the SaaS provider gives you a capability where certain permissions can be automatically revoked if they're unused, then I would call it intermediate. That's the highest level. The next one is understanding gaps. So a couple slides ago, I discussed classifying these apps and defining maturity levels, and here is where we kind of marry them. If the SaaS app is classified as a high-risk app, assume that you say they have to meet the intermediate level for each of the controls you define. Likewise, for the medium-risk apps, you say they have to at least meet the basic, and for low-risk apps, you say they at least have to meet the minimum level so that you have a baseline. You start documenting these gaps as findings. You collaborate with partner teams, the vendors, to address them. You can also gate contract renewals, launches, PO approvals on closing these gaps. You can ask the vendor, the business to close these risks before they can move forward with the launch. Next one, this is purely based on the assessment work that I've done in the past. Just quickly run through some of these findings. These are top risks, SaaS risks, as far as I can tell. Identity access management is the first one. Majority of the providers are able to meet the minimum requirements just by enabling single sign-on. However, that's just the first step. The capability to create local accounts, I mean the accounts that are not tied to the single sign-on. For example, APIs, you create non-SSO accounts or non-human accounts. That space requires some work. On the detection and response side, most of the vendors log something. Many log security events, and very few of them make those logs available to consumers. So as you can see here, the compliance level drops progressively. On the integrations, think of app stores, out-of-the-box integrations, custom integrations with a fourth party that makes data leaks to those fourth parties a reality. Surprisingly, many of the vendors have a good handle on the attack vector, at least via administrative controls. Application architecture. It's an interesting observation because almost all of the SaaS apps are hosted on commercial cloud, GCP, Amazon, AWS, Azure. And the providers are turning on security and privacy controls by default across all their services. So this is actually getting to a good place, and that's why you see the compliance numbers are very high. The last but not the least is the application misconfiguration. This is the new kid on the block. While cloud providers have ratified their infrastructure, business data is still at risk. For example, a cloud admin accidentally or intentionally opening up an S3 bucket or a Google Cloud Storage bucket without proper access control to the internet. What do you do there unless you do proper detection or you do proper monitoring? So we have to start embracing continuous monitoring to get the coverage we need in this space. Again, in the interest of time, I'm going to double click on the security controls that will come in handy. I'm going to talk about one preventive control and one detective control. not network anymore, but identity is the new control plane. The industry terminology is zero trust architecture. Beyond corp, so let me explain. So typically, access to corporate resources are available only to manage endpoints, because the assumption is only manage endpoints have the VPN software, and you use the network as the gateway to enter into the corp network. How do you extend this capability to SaaS apps? Just curious, show of hands, how many of your enterprise SaaS applications are actually accessible from your personal laptops also, as long as you're able to log in? No, I'll repeat the question. So how many of the enterprise SaaS applications that you all use for your employees can also be accessed from your personal devices, as long as you can log in, username, password, two-factor? So which is a pretty common use case. So at least as far as I can tell, this is a control that we invest heavily in some of the previous employers, and even at Google, is we use technology like context-aware access. So what is CAA is this is the tech that allows the creation and enforcement of access policies for apps based on attributes such as user identity, IP address, location, device security status, you name it. So using these attributes, you can define something called as trust levels. For example, running on the latest version of the operating system, latest browser version, the request originating from country A, you can call it as high trust. And permit access to SaaS applications based on the CAA policy. So, and we can use the single sign-on as your policy enforcement point for enforcing these policies. I'm not an expert, but I'm sure major identity providers like Azure AD, I think they call it conditional access, Okta, they should all have something similar. But what this will do is prevent accessing those enterprise SaaS applications from any device, but only enterprise managed applications, enterprise managed endpoints, as long as you can prove that they are in a secure state. However, context-aware access has a downside. It is a login time protection only, because we're hooking into the single sign-on process. How many times you sign in a day? You sign once, and then you get access to all the applications. And we enforce policies at SSO, at single sign-on point, which means throughout the session this is not applied. Meaning once you authenticate to the SaaS provider, you take the cookies from your hard disk, go to your personal device, pass the cookies to the SaaS provider, and you authenticate it. What you do is, this is where you can use commercial outbound web proxies, which kind of enforces these policies throughout the session. Quickly covering posture management. Like I said before, we all have to begin embracing continuous monitoring if we want to scale. Security engineers cannot have eyes everywhere, so we use commercial custom posture management solutions to continuously monitor these SaaS applications for misconfigurations and take corrective actions. For example, if you have a GitHub instance and you have an org admin who either by mistake or intentionally turn off 2FA, and how would you know? Unless you have proper detection or you have posture management to detect these kind of events very quickly. These scanners rely on APIs, log events provided by the SaaS provider to detect anomalous config changes in a very close to real time. Once they're pumped into your security incident event management platforms, you can then deploy countermeasures. Unfortunately, it is a detective control, but highly scalable. What are some of the current challenges is what data is in these 3P systems is a question that I constantly get. Unfortunately, this is a point-in-time snapshot, so it's not helpful. Unlike 1P systems, we do not classify all the data that goes into the third-party system, so we cannot protect them adequately. For example, you clear GitHub for hosting open source code today, but down the line, you figure out that's already being used for proprietary code. How do you know that? Many SaaS providers offer a single sign-on integration and creation of non-single sign-on accounts at the same time, kind of makes sense because you want to use the latter for any sort of API access. But unfortunately, humans also use those accounts, which we call it OAuth tokens, API tokens, you name it. These are long-lived, and if the account holder leaves the company, they will continue to have access to these applications and eventually the business data. Many SaaS providers, unfortunately, do not log relevant security events, and even if they do, it is for some parts of the application, like the account activity, but not everywhere, which makes detecting events harder and slower. With the usage of apps growing exponentially, SaaS apps growing exponentially, here is some food for thought. Is how do we do risk management of these SaaS applications at scale? Is with the classify apps based on risk, like I previously mentioned, so we can divide and conquer. Defining high, medium, low is based on your risk appetite. You could look at type of data, volume of data, geopolitics. I don't want my employees accessing this SaaS solution from this location. I want them to only access it from office, not any remote sites. These kind of access policies, you could define. And then determining the right action ranges from easy to scale to hard to do that doesn't. So what I mean by that is let's start from the top. We'll always have a whole bunch of low-risk SaaS apps, mom and pop shops, and we cover them appropriately via contract language. We don't do anything. Update your contracts. I know most of the companies that I've seen have some level of contracting that goes on with the SaaS provider. So update the contract language to include SaaS security requirements. Just rely on that. Don't do more, because we don't have the resource and budget to cover everything. So for all low risk, you just make contract changes. For medium risk, in addition to the contract changes, we do continuous monitoring. Just onboard them to some sort of posture management tool that continuously monitors for any sort of security events. That's all you do, nothing more. And for high risk, in addition to some of the things I just discussed, like contract language changes and continuous monitoring, you do that additional step and perform human-led security assessments, because you cannot do human-led security assessments across the board, because you don't have that resources and you don't have that bandwidth. And this is just one of the many ways to scale, but in my experience, this has yielded positive outcomes. Like I said in the beginning, we'll never be able to protect everything. We should do our best to mitigate the risks and acknowledge, accept where mitigation is not possible. Quickly, some key takeaways is everybody is in this together. How open source has brought us all together. SaaS security is also a shared problem, as we all are becoming more reliant on each other to serve our customers. So let's acknowledge that there is work and start moving towards a more resilient supply chain. Perfection is the enemy of progress. So start somewhere and perfect the system over time. Don't wait for a perfect time. It doesn't exist. Last, change is inevitable, especially in this ever-changing threat landscape. So always things scale. This was not in the plan for me to include this slide, but this started showing up in some of the feedback I received. So I think a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago, the CEO of Microsoft, Satya, said SaaS is gone. Did he actually say that? Yes, he did. But what he really meant is that in the new agentic AI era, the complexities of user interfaces will collapse. So instead of consumers accessing multiple applications and their user interfaces to get their job done, the agents will do exactly that using the SaaS provider's APIs. So I'm with him, and in my humble opinion, SaaS and the security challenges they present are here to stay. It's just that they will take a new form.
Okay. Well,
With
thank you very much.
I will.
We'll do Q&A, but we're at time. Before we do that, Peter Membre? Is Peter Membre? Can you please have a discussion with this man here about your slides? As you will have noticed, we don't have a cable from the presenter's laptop to the video system. I'm not sure why. I do apologize. Right. So we have about 4 If you want to go a little further, you can, or do Q&A, but need you off the stage in 4 minutes. Did you want to do questions or slides or what?
It doesn't change anymore.
Okay.
What I want to say, but it did not change.
Okay.
And then
Right. So, Q&A?
yeah, sure.
Questions? Do we have
Happy to take questions, or I can do that offline too. I'll be around.
questions from the audience? Has anyone here had to deal with either evaluating specialist service providers or being a specialist service provider and going through evaluations with large corporates? I have. I've done a good 50 or 60 as a specialist service provider to some of the world's largest corporations. And so, yeah, that's all very familiar and uncomfortable territory. Why was your classification minimum, basic, and intermediate? Why no advanced or maximum?
So again, based on some of the work I've done, I'm yet to find a SaaS provider that is getting to the advanced, because it's still a growing space. But I've not seen many SaaS vendors meeting the high bar yet.
On any of your requirements?
No, no, that's not true. In certain spaces, yes, they do.
Right.
But it doesn't make sense to have a whole new category for advanced, because there is only a very minimum, a small set of vendors that actually meet some level of advanced controls in certain categories. So it doesn't make sense to create a separate.
So it's a
one.
program scale issue. That's interesting. The company I was working for was processing moderately sensitive data. And so that meant that, meaning personal data, meaning that we had to hit the highest category in some of their criteria, but for the other, like 80%, it was like, as long as you've got some protection, we're fine. Interesting. All right, any other questions, thoughts, comments? Okay, stunned silence. Many thanks.